Nostradamus and the Notre Dame fire. Ladies and gentlemen, Rex Bear Leak Project, how the heck are you? Would you just look at it? John Hogue, the legend, is with us from HogueProphecies.com. And he recently released a newsletter for November. Actually, I got it about a week or so ago, but the information in there is paramount to the possibilities of finding the future through prophecy. The quatrains that Nostradamus had compiled over years and years has been dissected quite well, I feel. One of the best researchers of Nostradamus out there, Mr. John Hogue, the doppelganger of Nostradamus. I'm really excited for the opportunity. John, thanks for coming on the program. How the heck are you?
I'm good. I'm just, we were talking a while back about, how long ago was it when we did that show on the fire that burned Nostradamus? Nostradamus is actually the name, Notre Dame.
Wow.
Of our prophet in question.
Mm-hmm.
And, that is definitely, I'm trying to prompt up the book here. That is definitely, here it is, an issue that he would not have missed. So, what happened then was back on the 15th of April of this year, when the fire happened on tax day for the United States, it's really quite amazing that I would have thought that he would have mentioned something about his namesake, something about this fire. And actually, there was probably more waves of interest. There was more flood of people coming and making commentary about this all over the world, that it hasn't happened since 9/11, that so many people watch something happen across the world. In fact, I would even say the swift perception of more people watching this thing happening was even faster than during 9/11, because of technology, the social media, all these things, the cell phone spread around the world. Even in places where people are completely impoverished, they have a cell phone. And so it went like wildfire. And what also happened is everybody became a Nostradamus expert, and some astrologers in England and some other people actually had articles that went viral and then were picked up by other people. But the thing that was a revelation for me about all this is that I've been in this business for 4 decades. I've been a scholar of Nostradamus. I'm in my 4th decade now doing this. I started publishing things after studying him for 10 years. In the 70s, I started publishing my first papers and articles.
Hey, John, let me stop you real quick. I need to do a quick shout out to one of our.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. You guys, real quick, I just wanted to give a huge shout out. I wanted to thank my friends over at PatriotSunCooker.com. They helped make this possible. If you go to PatriotSunCooker.com, you can pick up one of these things. Use the code LEAK20, get an extra 20% off. Now, what this is it's actually a solar charger device that just uses the sun, and it will heat water in here. So if you have freeze-dried foods or tea or coffee, this is fantastic. Just put it in the sun. PatriotSunCooker.com. Weighs about 2.6 pounds. Everybody needs one of these in their car, in their bug-out bag. All right, John, thank you very much.
Yeah, so the shock that I had unexpectedly with this was that I feel like I am now, as far as somebody who is seasoned at this, somebody who has spent decades studying this, somebody who knows how to read the unique 16th century French of Nostradamus, who has taken the decades to learn and know what Nostradamus knew, and then also psychologically understand things that he would have picked up or not, that after Mario Reading died, I'm the last one standing of my generation of scholars who have put in the work. And what shocked me about the Notre Dame fire is how little knowledge there was in anyone who were standing up and publishing themselves as experts of Nostradamus. I was shocked to see in my life, before my eyes, the infamous phrase Nostradamus gave, who was a great scholar, to our times, when he said, "Oh, what a loss in learning and letters." That was his exclamation about us in the early 21st century. Oh, what a loss of learning and letters. And, you know, it's a strange thing that you would think with the revolution, you know, communication revolutions usually take a cycle of 500 years. For instance, we are now in the internet, World Wide Web, cell phone, social media, Facebook revolution, where people can interconnect all over the world. So 500 years ago, the printing press was created, which gave people the ability to print in their own languages, not only and increased reading, but you could put pamphlets and put them on the wall, and anybody who couldn't read, have somebody who could read and tell you what was going on. So the information age exponentially grew. It's one of the reasons why Nostradamus, half a century later, was one of the first best-selling authors in history because of the printing press. A lot of people could see it. Information, and it also got dangerous like it is today, where more information meant literally caused the Protestant Reformation, which created the people reading their religions in their own languages, not in Latin or something. So it opened minds. Now, 500 years before that was the Crusades, where the Western knights who went into the Middle East, when they came home, they actually ended the Dark Ages. They actually ended what was left of the Dark Ages, because going to the Near East and to North Africa, where some of the Crusades happened, they saw whole other different things, new mathematical ideas, new forms of medicine. At that time, the Muslim nations were at their peak and in their golden age, the time of the Moors in Spain and all of that. And it's where we get the term algebra is from an Arabic for it's a whole new systems of math. And that got brought home to the castles and the serfs and all of the feudalistic Western civilization. And it began the change in the next 5 centuries that led to the Renaissance. And if you jump another 5 centuries, you've got our information explosion. In every step, there was a breakthrough of new ideas that also scared the status quo. A lot of the things that happened in each time, and we're in a similar thing. But now it's a unique situation where people are now, rather than this being a way to open people to other places, it sometimes is becoming a system that is magnifying your own isolation by only giving you what the algorithms say you like, and only literally keeping your friends online that agree with you. And there's even algorithms that drop people off. And if their program doesn't see you harmonizing with them, and this happens to me all the time. Now, the way I deal with it, the way I try to get around it is I always throw all kinds of, I'm very eclectic. I go all over the place, so the robots keep offering me everything that I want to see. I don't just stay on one thing. And that's one way you kind of challenge the robots. And so where there was other, I would just say in the 1,000 years AD and in the 500 AD, there were challenges to the status quo of what people knew. For instance, like Galileo in the Renaissance, proving that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, and the rise of science, which threatened religious hegemony over the minds of people. And now we have a situation that is not so much into the religious situation, but it's more like now the information that we freely share is turning us into a product for information sale to the new kind of aristocracy that's threatening us, the new feudal lords, if you will, in this neo-feudalist development, which is the corporate 1% class, you know, the what I call the CEO oligarchy of CEOs. And strangely enough, I was just looking over it again because of well, I was just looking over the situation again. That's something I wrote about 12 years ago about this theory of the CEO oligarchy. And I also have this idea that rather than completely maligning this group of people, what people need to do who are not part of the CEO oligarchy is to inspire some of them to use their power and influence to set the world in a different direction, you know, set it away from things that might destroy it. And so, you know, I always feel that anything that is resisting change in our world, it has to be encountered, but with love, but also standing your ground. And so, and also not judging a group of people, because the 99% are an infinite number of individuals. That's what I was writing 12 years ago. And the 1% are also different individuals. I mean, it comes back to the theme we've spoken of before here, is this, there are certain abstracts which we need in our communications that have become false realities. Well, for instance, like that there's such a thing called a forest. A forest is a name for a group of individual trees. Such is the case of a humanity. Well, that's another kind of forest, isn't it? It takes the emphasis away from the individual, where I would contend a lot of the most atomic unit, the smallest unit of the human condition, the individual, is actually the most powerful split. It's the atom that if you split and it becomes enlightened, a handful of such people can change the world. It's kind of a happy atomic blast, an atomic bliss blast. And so that also plays a lot in the general view of the times that we are entering, because, you know, here we have 2020 just around the corner. In fact, tomorrow, I have a Russian film crew coming to my house. They're coming to do a nationally broadcast look at the coming of 2020. I will probably have at least 30 million to 40 million Russians watching me around New Year's. And this happened to me in 2018, and it may happen again. Not one, but 3 major networks in Russia had talked to me. I just got the questions from the producer. And what I find amazing about these questions is they're really well studied. It's like unlike what happens to me on TV most of the time in the United States, which fortunately doesn't always happen this way, but most of the time the questions I get are from people who haven't even read me. And so I have to then think for them. But these questions were very well prepared. They had read me. They are challenging questions. And you know, a lot of them dealt in general about what was going to happen in 2020. And a lot of them, of course, deal with the seemingly rise of upheavals and things happening on this planet. There are a lot of people getting out on the streets all over this world demonstrating. I've never seen it. I'm, you know, a baby boomer. I saw a lot in the 60s. I have never seen how many people are marching and petitioning their governments. Most of the themes are that they don't feel their governments are listening to them. and they don't feel the setup of the economic system is allowing them to also prosper, as well as a handful of people in each country. And this is a common theme. And it makes me wonder, because a lot of people ask me, are things going to change? You know, we have big things coming up in 2020 that could change the course of where we're going. And they asked me, is this kind of relentless corporate march going to end? And I have to tell them that a lot of them are hoping it's going to happen before November. Push, push, nudge, nudge. And the astrology, this is what I tell them. There are 3 pillars in astrology that I see in mundane judicial astrology, the study of world movements, governments, the future of humanity. There are 3 pillars, 3 planets of the outer planet realm which really define the stage in which we in our world play our parts. And it can be a good stage, a bad stage, a huge stage, a small, but it's because of these influences, the bigger picture, the backdrop, which influences the inner planets dealing with our individual lives. So there are 3 things, 3 planets: Saturn, Pluto, and Uranus. Saturn is about limits and about reality checks. It's about time, and time being up, or time for beginnings. Chronos is the other name of Saturn. Saturn gets a bad rap, but Saturn's actually the ruler of Capricorn, so it's the ruler of forms, of order, of economic rules, of structures and architectures, of economy and politics and society that we need to sustain a civilization, so that if people disagree with each other, at least there's a certain commonality and common ground. Otherwise, the system breaks down. The system is really under stress right now in exactly the ways that have happened just before great revolutions. The one that it most resembles and astrologically parallels is the French Revolution. And I'll explain why. Because what happened in the French Revolution, astrologically speaking, is about to begin with the fall of those 3 pillars of Saturn, reality, Pluto, the bigger generation regenerations. That's what we're about to go into. The Pluto's transits through the signs define the generation of the parents who generate the children as well. And so that's the second one, and the third is Uranus. Now, Saturn is in Capricorn, its home ruler. It will leave Saturn on the 18th of December, 2020, several weeks after the important issues that everybody's watching out for in November of 2020. And it will leave. That's the first pillar. When that happens, the time where the corporate hegemony has nothing to stop it, where its tide is in its favor since 2010, since certain things were changed that in certain rulings that allowed money from corporate interests to absolutely flood the system in our nation. That created this roll-in of a takeover of things. That forward motion, where nothing that fights against it can stop it, begins to end at the end of December 2020, because that's the fall of the first pillar, Saturn. Saturn is no longer a limiting force in a lot of other people questioning this situation and wanting a change. But it's a slow process. The second issue will come in 2024. That is when Pluto, which has spent a long time transiting also Capricorn, order, structure, the world order, if you like, will leave, just like Saturn did, will leave and enter Aquarius in 2024. Saturn does it in 2020, end of 2020. And that begins to unravel the control of the status quo. There's more climate for people to question, to protest, to petition, to make things change. The powers that be will resist that, but they will not have the kind of complete control that they had then. Give you an example. The last time this happened, the last time Saturn significantly left an Earth sign was back in when it was in Taurus in 1942 in May. Up to that point, Saturn and Uranus is in a similar position it is back then that it is in now. It's in Taurus. That was the time of the rise of the last cycle of fascism that came to the world. The new cycle is here now in the guise of corporate aristocracy of the 1%. Until Saturn left in May of 42, Taurus into Gemini, the forces of fascism in the 30s and 40s were unstoppable. Starting when Uranus was in Aries during the time of the false flag Reichstag fire that helped Adolf Hitler become not only chancellor, but the dictator of Germany with his enabling laws. That exactly happened in the exact degrees that we had our little interesting gathering together for power change in November of 2016. Now it's moving a little slower this time around. By May of the following year, in Hitler's case, he had achieved, when Uranus went into Taurus, full hegemonic control of Germany. So Taurus is also been entered by Uranus in our times. It's in its early degrees right now. It's in its fall, just like then. That means that it's the last place that the planet ruling a revolution, Aquarius, the new age, it's the last place it wants to be because it's completely suppressed. And so it's fighting it. And that's where you're seeing the rumblings coming on in the streets in the world right now. That is the Uranus-Taurus effect. Now, when Saturn left its pillars, look at it as if it's trying to keep the roof up, which is Uranus, and there's 3 pillars. The first pillar falls at the end of 2020. That's Saturn. The second pillar, or the second leg of the table, let's say the top of the table is Uranus, and it's wanting to change, to bring more revolutionary change for everybody on the planet. So this tripod table, if you will, these 3 pillars, one pillar goes down, the table starts getting a little unstable. The powers that be have a harder time keeping things together and suppressing this angry Uranus. Next comes 2024, 4 years later, and you see Pluto's pillar leave. And now the table is about to fall down. And by 2026, when Uranus leaves Taurus into Gemini, you have a similar situation ultimately that happened when the same thing happened when Saturn left Taurus in 42. What happened in May 42? 2 to 3 weeks after this change, the Battle of Midway happened. Japanese forces in World War II, their carrier fleets were unstoppable. They were conquering all these areas. America was being defeated on every front. But then the Battle of Midway happened, where 4 Japanese fleet carriers in 5 minutes were destroyed by American dive bombers. And this was the turning of the tide in the Pacific. What was happening in May in the Eastern Front in Russia? The Sixth Army was entering Stalingrad, thinking they would take it over in a few weeks. 5 months later, they never got out alive. And it turned the tide on the Eastern Front, and the fascists on both sides of the world can never do anything right after that. That's a variation of that theme begins in the, like I said, in December of 2020. It gets a huge shock in 2021 because the economy is going to collapse. We're going to see the greatest depression, not the Great Depression, coming probably as soon as 2021. That's the upheaval of revolution. That's the big splash the coffee in the guy's face and ow moment where people wake up. People who are not ready, people's comfort zones are going to be upset. And when that happens, the good side of that is a whole lot of people who in more kind of sleepy times are not challenged to grow, will grow. They will think out of the box. They will get more creative. They will take risks. They won't do remakes of movies called Our Lives anymore. They may succeed, they may fail, but they'll be more alive. And what then happens is revolution happens. What finally happens is when Uranus leaves in the mid-decade, that's when the tide clearly turns. And then you have all these trines between Pluto and Uranus. I just finished with this. Pluto and Uranus, which will, remember in 2010 to 2012, how tough it was to move forward. Things kept running into walls and all. That was an opposition of these two planets. Now we get the beauty of the trines, the harmonic collaboration of these two planets, which means that tremendous changes will start happening for the positive at the middle of the 2020s.
Okay. The question I was going to ask you was, I've been reading the creation tablets and doing a lot of analysis, and there's different names that represent different planets. And the questions I wanted to ask you is, are the gods, the original texts that talk about the gods, are they referring to the planets? And in ancient Babylonian texts or Sumerian texts, is Anu connected with Uranus, and is Pluto connected with Gaga?
Yeah, I mean, in the earlier times, that also goes with Vedic astrology, the concept of the heavenly bodies. For instance, this is where we get the term heavenly bodies. They embody the divine. Some people put personification upon that. So that process has also happened in ancient astrology and stellar divination, stars. And you know, one could then look at not only stars and planets. I mean, planeta means wanderer in ancient Greece. So they looked at it as a person. That red spot in the sky we call Mars, that's the Roman name for Ares. Ares was the Greek term for Mars. And because he was red, and because it seemed that whenever that planet moved in relation to other planets, if it was in 90 degrees to them, a lot of times earthquakes, upheavals, and wars happened. It's not just because it was red. It was because of that, you know, the ancients had no instruments. They just looked at the sky all night for thousands of years, and they marked these differences and these things happening and created astrology. And you know, there were things that have happened. For instance, there was a big earthquake today in Albania. First thing I did is look over my shoulder back there at the calendar, and it's the new moon. You will find, and I've shown this in my books, of the greatest earthquakes that have happened in the last 150 years. It is remarkable how, like clockwork, almost all the great and fatal earthquakes with great loss in life and damage happen during new moons, full moons, and or in lesser sense during the 90 degree square of a first quarter and a last quarter. And there's a slight orb of influence, but a lot of them are spot on the same day, about half of them. But then the others happen within 2 days in and 2 to 3 days out. And it's like clockwork. So the ancients knew that. They didn't have, I guess they weren't as distracted as we are and didn't have a lot to play with. So they went really deep in what they did have to play with. And yes, so the whole issue of them being gods, Jupiter is a god. So yes, this often happened, but it's changed.
So, okay, thank you. And then now, do you have any information? I appreciate that. And do you have any information on the gods, the pantheon of gods that are referred to like Anu and Uranus and Pluto and Gaga? Or is that something that not everybody's read the Sumerian tablets and done astrotheology in ancient Babylonia. So I'm asking you questions that you might not have the answers to.
Well, I tell you, let's reverse this. You tell me what you know about it, and then I'll respond to that. That'd be a new way. Why don't you tell me about it, and then I'll.
Let's talk about it.
I'll respond to what you know.
Let's talk about it. Okay, cool.
Yeah, okay.
So I've read the creation tablets and various creation tablets. Many of those were discovered in the Middle East, ancient Mesopotamia tablets that describe the creation of the planets and the stars and the heavens and the gods and the constellations. But in the Enuma Elish, the description of particular deities, for example, Gaga, is one of the deities that's referred. Lady Gaga. Oh, her music is so amazing. She loves it so much. But that's not who I'm talking about. She's actually very talented. I mean,
I'm a big fan, so that's why I'm having a fan moment. Sorry.
So, but people be like, Rex, you're the devil. I knew it because you like Lady Gaga. How dare you? Anybody gets a little bit of fame, and there's going to be a million conspiracies out there about them. And we all know that everything's real on the internets.
Yeah, and you and I have our own share of that fame meditation.
Oh, yeah. I'm a reptilian shapeshifter, Anunnaki Jesuit shill that promotes the Earth being Earth-shaped. Not, I'm like, yeah, let's figure it out. The Earth is shaped like the Earth because everybody's going to have their own idea. But anyway, let me go back. Let's go back to the task at hand here. We're having a pattern interrupt. I'm getting 5G'd. But it's good for you, folks. Just ask the expert. No, I mean, anyway. So Gaga is, from what I've heard, connected with Pluto. Anu, which is the king of the Anunnaki, or not the king of the Anunnaki, the father of the Anunnaki, is what I've heard connected with Uranus. So when you're bringing up these astrotheological connections, you're talking about astrology and how it connects with our own personal emotions and what happens here. I was just wondering if there's any information that you might have that connects some of these names in the old creation stories. Have you read the Sumerian tablets?
No, I haven't. So that's why I was asking you to. I mean, I have not read them specifically, but I've studied some of that situation, the ancient myths of Gilgamesh and all of that. But I guess my connection is more into how that clearly was started in Sumeria and then passed into the Hellenistine period, because you'll find similar worshiping of gods and goddesses, Venus, Mars, Jupiter. These are the Romanized versions of Aphrodite, Ares, and Zeus and Jupiter. Kronos, Uranus. Well, no, Kronos is Saturn. And Uranus is kind of the god of chaos, the god of surprises, the god of the unorthodox. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like it follows a similar evolution from Sumeria.
It would be great to see what some of the connections are. And you've studied a lot of Eastern astrology and a lot of the ancient Vedas and the traditions that go back thousands of years. Some say even further back than many of the Western traditions.
70,000 years, some say.
Yeah.
The Rig Veda is has has a constellation conjunction aspect, which has not happened for 70,000 years.
That's awesome. Can you give us a quick rundown on that? And then we'll jump back to what we were talking about. Cause that blows my mind. Where can I find that?
Well, there are 4 Vedas, and the oldest is the Rig Veda, R-I-G, or Rig Veda. And it's, I heard it commonly explained. Even my own teacher, Osho, used to talk about it. And from what I'm gathering, it was about a very rare constellation pattern that happened, association of planets in Vedic astrology that has not, and there have been scholars in India who have said this has not happened since 70,000 years. Some people even say it goes farther back, because if there was already this sophisticated society that was doing that, it might be thousands of years farther back. I will say this, usually with me, because I have so much going on, I have not actually looked into the exact configuration that, I suggest to your watchers that maybe you Google it and you look and search for certain Vedic statements about it. I know of it. I'm certainly, I usually, when I'm actually feeling compelled to write a book or an article about it, that's when I go deep into it to see. But from what I hear about it, it's definitely a very interesting theory, and it has certain parallels. We talked on other shows about how an innocent boat who's doing radar scans of continental shelf off Ahmedabad, India, saw 2 grids of 2 cities that had clearly been moved from the 2 major floods of the melting of the ice after the last ice age, which means we're talking about a city there that could have been there at least 7,000 BC and maybe 10,000 BC. So there's also in the South Indian area, closer to Ceylon, but slightly on the south tip of India, there's a stone chiseled corral, which is clearly smooth shaped, and it's definitely been carved it's out of solid stone. And it has there's a certain oval quality about it, with openings like this that narrow, and then narrow and narrow in 3 places to a oval circular main square. And it's underwater. And it would have also been something constructed, kind of an ancient Indian Stonehenge of some kind. Who knows what it was? But no one goes there. The dogma against questioning this certain dogmatic idea that civilization is here and in a certain period of time is constantly being, it's just like with Nostradamus. There's a lot of people who fly with their imaginations. I see a lot of that in Ancient Aliens over the decades, and I've even appeared on a couple Ancient Alien shows, and I understand it because I see it a lot in Nostradamus. Like I was saying earlier, I saw amazing stuff being projected on prophecies that had nothing to do with the fire in Notre Dame, and it was so off the mark. Everybody missed the quatrain. And I thought, well, it's time for me to step in and put the weight of my 40 plus years doing this and the skill sets that I have, which unfortunately seem to be, I'm the last Nostradamian standing with these that is a published author and well known around the world. To get back to that theme, is I went to think that Nostradamus, because of his connection to Notre Dame, the fact that when he came to France for his audience with the king, had actually, and the queen had actually gone first to Notre Dame, Our Lady, because basically, if you translate his name was Michael Our Lady. That's what Michael of Our Lady is literally what it means in English. So it was Nostradamus, because it had an S in Old French then, a Gothic S, which looks like a T in a way, a flipped over kind of weird T. But anyway, and so he went there and went to mass as soon as he got there after the long journey from the south of France. And then he sought out a hotel of Saint Michel, because his first name, Michel, Michel, unusual way of spelling it. He went to the hotelier next to the church that was blessed, dedicated to Saint Michael. So he was trying to hedge his bets because he was really frightened. And there's a record of what he said to his publisher on his way up the Rhone River to Lyon, where his publisher lived. He thought he was going to get executed in this audience. He was very upset and afraid. And of course, it didn't turn out that way. He ended up being very fast friends with Queen Catherine de' Medici, who was quite an occultist, and they had a relationship unto his death of kind of a master-disciple relationship, and she protected him. And at the end of his life, even at the beginning of a royal procession through after the first of what were going to be 8 civil wars that he foresaw between religious sects of French, the Protestant Huguenots and the Catholics, the Catholic Queen Regent with the child king, Charles IX, went and made a very public dedication to Nostradamus, the old man, before all the villagers of Salon-Provence, and really made it clear that he was her man and to stop persecuting him. He was persecuted by both sides for what he did. So, and then 18 months later, he died in his bed rather than burned at the stake or any of that. So, there has to be a lot of interest prophetically for Nostradamus for the namesake to have burned down. So even that wasn't known by most of the people writing articles and pretending to be experts. They didn't know the man, and they didn't know how to look for this mystery. So the way you look at it is that you follow the trail, which I do in this new book, which is out now, Nostradamus and the Notre Dame fire, the authentic predictions, is now out as an ebook at Amazon for $3.99, and it will. I always like to keep my prices low so that more and more people can read. It's an important story where I go deep into the head of Aries prophecy that got very popularized by certain astrologers in England and others who wrote these articles about it. Now everybody thinks what's sad about that is this poor person, she literally whitewashed her own projections over a masterpiece painting of the future that had nothing to do with the Notre Dame fire at all. It has everything to do with dating the head of Aries prophecy that was marking the long century that's ended with Jupiter and Saturn. In other words, in conjunction. So it's an astrological clue saying, okay, take out your ephemeruses, and you can now look at thousands of years of aspects, if you like, online. Makes it a lot easier. The key is he's talking about the head of Aries. It's talking about someone coming back, or someone like this person coming back to cause evil times at the end of a long century. So the head of Aries is an Aries, is the conjunction, is the constellation of Aries, which has Jupiter and Saturn in it. It's so obvious. I'm surprised this astrologer overlooked it, but she has no knowledge of Nostradamus research. So it's a very rare tell. It happens only, Saturn and Jupiter become conjoined only once every 20 years. Now, to go back to Sumeria, the Sumerians and the Babylonians would never pick a king, never pick a great change or a judgment of governments during that year. That is a year of meditation, sacrifice, and atonement. That cycle of 20 years is like the end of a generational situation. You know, the gods that would have been Jupiter and Kronos, expansion and retraction, are together in the heavens. And so, but we who are not in tune with that, in tune with the cosmos in our modern times, we in this country have elected a president every 20 years that ends in a year of a zero, like 2020, which is the next Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. The last one happened in 2000. The one before that happened in 1980. The one before that happened in 1960. Do you see a pattern here? What has happened? Yes. What has happened? Yes.
Oh, real quick. Okay. And not trying to throw a pattern interrupt, but also just recently, Jupiter and Venus had that incredible conjunction. And I'm wondering if that has some significance that you could share with us when you get done with this. Because I was like, wow, that was amazing watching that coming down from, where was I at? Crestone. I was driving from Crestone.
You mean Mercury
out there? What's that?
You mean Mercury in the sun?
No, you could see No, that was amazing too. That was 11/11/19. That was the retrograde. I got footage of that. That was amazing. But I'm referring to the Jupiter Venus, where they were next to each other, and actually there was a part where they passed each other. What would the significance be there?
Well, I saw that low in the sky up here in the Pacific Northwest. I remember that was quite beautiful. It was very far south because, well, we're way up here. Gateway to Alaska. It's not as much in a judicial political astrological sense. It's not as much of a big thing it would be more intense if it were outer planets doing the same thing. When you see, the division of the stars and the planets are such. The inner planets inside the asteroid belt define our ego, personal, individual selves. The planets beyond the asteroid belt define the stage in the world and how it influences us. So in the astrology that I am proficient in all these decades, which I had to learn, another thing that has to be learned if you're going to get Nostradamus as right as you could possibly get him, is that usually those are really nice instances for birth charts of individuals and stuff to carry throughout their life, like the babies that were born during that time. With the Venus and Jupiter. You said Venus and Jupiter, correct?
Yes, sir. Venus and Jupiter.
Well, what that would create is a potential for those children during that conjunction to magnify the expansion planet of the higher mind with the feminine forces of being loving, of being aesthetically beautiful, of being a diplomat, of being a peacemaker. So in the ways in which, and then of course you have to add, this is the big unknown that a lot of astrologers who are just into their astrology don't understand, is that you also have to be an empath to understand the soul and how the soul will take on these aspects. And that's beyond astrology. That has to be something you have this gift. Because the very same, it's just like in tarot cards. If I pull a card for you, as I do in a lot of my readings, in fact, I'm doing a marathon of readings in a few days on Thanksgiving and Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I have 4 hours slots of readings for all 4 days. So if you go to my website, hogueprophecy.com, there's right at the top, there's a link about contact Hogue about readings. Click on that Hogue bulletin email and put Hogue readings on it, and then I'll get back to you and you can have a reading with me. And in this process, when I'm looking at your astrology, as well as when I'm looking at the tarot to go deeper than the astrology, it triggers for me a deeper way to channel in for you. It's amazing to me how exactly the same card can be pulled from one person. And I show them this online, the card, and it says exactly the opposite. It speaks to me in a completely different way than it did to the person before. And how that's done is I am tuned in to empathically to the vibe of the soul of that person. And that is what's missing in most technically brilliant astrologers who rarely have that ability to understand that the astrology is not the all and everything. It's a Kelly Blue Book for your car. It doesn't tell you, it tells you everything about the car you're going to drive, but not about the driver. I do readings where we talk about the car, but we get to the driver. Who is this person driving this body-mind vehicle through their lives? What are the potentials that are in the strengths and weaknesses of the car that the unique consciousness latent inside the soul can use? And sometimes in some charts, the things that look absolutely dire, if you're simply in the mind with astrology, lots of squares and problems. Well, take for instance myself. I have only one trine. Everything's squares, oppositions, and conjunctions in my birth chart. But whoever I am who've come in to drive this vehicle, I have turned all of that around. I have used, this soul has used it as a challenge to grow. If I were not that kind of soul, if I had been successfully programmed to be somebody to follow along and not been this spiritual rebel that I am, and just follow along according to other people's dictates on how I should live, I probably would have been dead by 30 with the chart I had. But that's not what happened. It's actually from my own gauntlet of fire with my astrology and my life, I realized from direct experience that these aspects depend on who you are behind them. And that's what I help you find out in these readings. So I want to get back to what happened with the head of Aries, because in the book we talk about it's one of the most amazing prophecies because it defines something that's very rare. A Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aries happens very rarely, maybe once or twice a century, sometimes twice. What makes, he's dating the long century he's talking about in that prophecy where this evil one in his times would come back. And the thing is, it happened in 1939, just after World War II began. And it happened again in 1999, just before the end of the 20th century. See, this astrologer in England thought that Nostradamus wanted to make a long century and stretch this out into the second decade of the 21st century. You cannot make that kind of amateurish error unless you have not studied the person and understand that his whole idea of centuries was these 100 verses per volume. He could count to 100. That has to be more poetic. This is also what's lost by so many people who think they know what Nostradamus is talking about. They don't even know that his original prophecies are all in rhymes. He was quite a rhymer in French. In my biography on Nostradamus, all the prophecies, I actually had time to rhyme them in English. It's a whole different story. You have to be a poet. You have to understand where fact meets subjectivity and a poetic metaphor. Long century is the 20th century, where those two conjunctions happen. The first one in one of the most dire periods of the 20th century, at the onset of World War II. And the evil man that he's probably talking about is the man he calls Hister, who was allied to a man called Duce Mussolini. And the third ally, who is like the sun and threatened when it is on the surface of the water, that metaphor, the sun of Japan its ships being sunk by US submarines. Hister is the ancient name for the river Danube. It is the river Danube where Adolf Hitler grew up, where his mind and his evil was formulated. The way it's spelled is H-I Gothic S-E-R. The Gothic S has a horizontal bar like a T, like it's a swooning T. He's probably even trying to hint that there's a T in this Hitler, who is his second of three antichrists, the first being Paul Né Laurent, which is an anagram Napoléon in French. That's the other thing. People are constantly sending me translations of anagrams, word plays of Nostradamus in English. Nostradamus didn't speak English. You have to know Greek, French, and all the other things, and then you find, for instance, like Barbare, which is the key cornerstone to an Arab ally who could trigger the great eagle kings of Russia and America to be dragged into a war in the Middle East. And this is imminent danger we're talking about here. This is stuff that could happen soon, or hopefully we avoid it. The two great eagle kings of the North are America and Russia with their eagle symbols, the bald eagle of the Americans, the two-headed eagle of Russia. And Barbare, unless you know your French, it is actually an anagram for of or from Darab in the French spelling of Arab. So the vassal, who's the Barbare vassal, the satrap, is an Arab. And they rebel against their eagle king masters, and that drags us into the war. And Syria is mentioned, and Persia, Iran, and the Arabian Gulf, and even the Strait of Hormuz, Karmania, is an ancient name for it, is mentioned in these prophecies. So we are tiptoeing on this minefield of this happening imminently, unexpectedly, in the next few years or in the next moment. And so just a caveat about that is that Nostradamus is the first major prophet, and I've probably said this before on the show, but I'll say it here again because of the shocking revelation I've just unloaded. To balance that out, is Nostradamus was never about futures being written in stone. He's the first major prophet in history which documented alternative futures. In fact, if we go back to him going and praying in the Notre Dame, hoping he's going to keep his head, it was his audience with the king where he gave the king and the queen of France two futures, which are documented in the prophecies that they were reading. One future, about 9 quatrains, 4-line verses, showed Henry II of France would become the second Charlemagne and unite France, conquer northern Italy, and defeat Savoy, and make that all a vast, large French kingdom where Protestants and Catholics would not go to civil war. Or the famous quatrain that got Catherine de' Medici's attention, which had him summoned to court to explain himself, because she had another prophet in Florence, she's a Florentine from Italy, who married the king, and Luke Gericus had a similar astrological prediction that the King Henry should stop jousting, that he could end up dying in an accident, and that would be detrimental to the future of France. So here's two completely different prophets who don't know each other. She knows them because she saw Nostradamus's book. She was probably the first person to read Nostradamus because she used to get all the books from the occult. If they were occult books, all the books that are published in France had to go through the copyright of the royal offices. She had her agents in the royal offices always bringing any occult or magical or prophetic book to her. So she's probably the first person who ever read Nostradamus. She's his first fan. And she knew that her astrologer in Florence had said a similar thing. That got her to nag her kingly husband to summon this Nostradamus fellow. And so Nostradamus used to be famously diplomatic when he was in front of royalty, and that's in the letters of different courts talking about him. He said, we don't know what they said, but obviously because of some of the things the king said after the meeting kind of indicate that that he was told, look, you're either going to die of a jousting accident or you're going to be this king. And it doesn't look like you're going to be both. So there's free choice. So he was the first purveyor of that, the first one to stand up against the dogma and prophecy that I struggle with daily, with people saying, well, it's all preordained, and if you don't say it exactly that way, then you must be a fraud. And I said, well, no, I'm just not a dogmatic person who's been programmed to think this lie is true in my experience. And so anyway, you have this situation where the head of Aries is not about Nostradamus. It's not even mentioned in the prophecy. This author was using astrological aspects that didn't even exist, outer planets and stuff that Nostradamus didn't even know about, and she was unaware of that. And so, and then she did the thing which is always the thing I'm worried about, even my own work and with other people. Whatever you say that sticks on Nostradamus either makes him more amazing than he actually was, or takes away the real message, which is amazing, by projecting some ignorance on it, whitewashing it with ignorance. So what this is about the times of Hitler, the head of Aries, the time at the long century, Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, was at the terrible times that were building as the World War II began, that Hitler started, that these times are coming back after the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of 1999. That means in the early part of the 21st century. And I've calculated it to be now, more than ever, is the time of these dangers. So that's how most people got stuck, and they didn't find the prophecy that actually I found. And this is how I found it. As a detective of Nostradamian clues, if everyone in France called a cathedral, I'm going down to the lady, I'm going to pray at the feet of the lady, Virgin Mary. In France, that was the colloquialism of the 16th century. If you're saying you're going to the Lady of Paris to do prayer and penance, everybody knew you were going to Notre Dame, Our Lady. And so I said, all right, I've created this whole program in the 90s, the Nostradamus dictionary, the Nostra dictionary, where I found a way to look at all the word patterns that Nostradamus used and all the ways in which he used it in modern and Old French. So I then tried this idea, okay, lady, I looked for Notre, our, there was no Our Ladies, but there are at least 23 mentions of dame, madame, my lady, dame, and not without the Notre. So I started, and what I've done is I created this book, which not only looks at what I contend is the real prophecy about what happened on the fire on 15th of April, but I also take you down the line of all these amazing stories about dames that are sometimes churches, sometimes famous, interesting women of historical import. And each of the stories is a short story of what happened to them. And I march through all the prophecies, and then we get to see them out of the time sequence that he put them in. So it's a whole string of interesting short stories about each of these dames. And some of them end up being, one was St. Paul's Cathedral in the famous fire of London. And this is the one that's absolutely clear of a famous fire of a cathedral. And it happened in 1666. And he does this amazing play with numbers, which comes up to 1666. He mentions London outright, Londres, in Old French. And he talks about the Great Lady, its roof collapses on the people. And that's what happened in the fire of London. He also talked about the plague of London in quatrains that happened a few quatrains later in the line, but it's actually about an incident that happened before the fire. I tie these two together in the prophecy and do something I've never done before. I match the 4 lines together, and it's amazing how it weaves together like a garment, and you can read the story of both the plague of London and the fire of London. And what was the cause in Nostradamus's mind? Was it they killed their Catholic king, Charles I? They beheaded him. And that this was the retribution, divine retribution on the Londoners for what had happened. And it, whether it's a sign of the bias of the times, and by the way, this happened like 100 and some years after Nostradamus wrote it in 1666. He wrote it in the 1550s. So I use that to show this is where it's unquestionably about this. I mean, it even describes this fulgure, these flashes of explosive light. And then I found out recently that the London firemen in that day used gunpowder to blow up whole tracts of houses, just like in the San Francisco fire of 1906. They used gunpowder, and it was described as these huge flashes and explosions of thunder. And so Nostradamus is actually hearing this future fire, because nobody had done that before until the fire of London. So it gets into all this book gets into all this amazing stories of history told in a unique way. After first in the book kind of deconstructing all the projections of amateurs, and finally coming to the one quatrain, which I will prompt up now, that looks at this. I'm just seeing it here.
While you're pulling that up real quick, let me ask you a question. There's a very interesting being that I recently discovered called Ahriman. Have you heard that name before?
Ahriman. It rhymes with Hanuman. It's the monkey god of Hindu, of the Ramayana.
In some Persian texts and mythos and legend, Ahriman is essentially the devil reincarnate in physical form. Going back thousands of years, these translations, the original text, they were translated again by Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah.
And the reason I brought it up is because you mentioned the fire at 1666. Yeah. And according to this legend, according to this, every 666 years, this being is reincarnated.
Well, there's a lot of stories like that in my book. In my book, Messiahs, I looked at 33 different prophetic traditions anticipating a savior of the world and also the Antichrist figure. And that in that book, and I published in 1999, that's similar to, you see the evolution of that out of Zoroastrian texts to the Dajjal in Islamic apocalyptic prophecy. Dajjal, the pretender Messiah, is their Antichrist. The beast of Revelation, 666, is supposed to be the number of man in sin, normal, ordinary man. 666 is the numerical equivalent of Nero Caesar in the texts, where this is before numbers were created on their own, and up until about 300 years after the book of Revelation was written, the Indians and the Muslims created number system. But before that, all number counting was that every letter in your alphabet had a numerical value, so you spelled things out. And the Romans kind of went only with a few letters to make the XX, IIIs, and all of that. So they were on their way to creating a number system just using a few letters. But it used to be that all the letters, like in Hebrew or in Greek, had numerical significance. So St. John in Book of Revelation 13, in that chapter, was trying desperately to actually force the issue. I've never seen a prophet try so hard to actually spill the beans of his secret. He wanted them to find out. And why? Because if you read the book of Revelation beyond the Sunday school limits, you discover that it's about something that's going to happen just around the corner, not 2,000 years later. There are 21 references in the book of Revelation for it's coming now in your time. You're all going to see it. It's coming. It's here. It even ends with a statement, get this out soon, in so many words. So when you look at that, and then you look at how this man, St. John the Divine, who might have been John the Apostle or might have been another John. There were many Johns in those days, and Mary Magdalene's too. But so the thing is, what he basically, in Hebrew and in Greek, the numerical equations of anybody living of any fame or import that dominated Europe like a great power over the Mediterranean area, it's very clear the king is, this beast is like a world leader, and in that world of 35 AD, perhaps, when it was written a few decades before the sack of Jerusalem, the big Mamu, the big evil force, the ultimate oligarch, was a man named Neron Kaiser in Greek. That's what the Greek in Revelation was written in Greek. It means Nero Caesar. There's a fragment of an earlier edition that we don't have the complete volume of, but the fragment of Revelation 13 calls the beast 616. That's the number of the beast. That earlier version, that summons up the numerical equivalent of Caligula Kaiser. Caligula Caesar, Emperor Caligula, the mad emperor. And what is the historical parallel to that? He was considered certainly a beast by any devout Jew, any devout Kohanim, and priests, because he put a statue of Jupiter in the holy ground of the holy temple, and of Herod's temple, which is like the ultimate pollution, some pagan god in the inner sanctum. Caligula had that done. And so he was considered a beast. So we have historical parallels to Nero, who was another mad Claudio Julian, the last one, Caesar, and this other one, doing something that was considered unholy and evil, and it's being mentioned. So you have facts leading to something profoundly shocking when you consider this is the biggest upset of 2,000 years. That even in today's questions that I got from the Russians, they have a whole set of things about all the 7 plagues of the book of Revelation and how they all should match things that are happening in the world. And I'm going to have to tell them tomorrow, no, this is about a prophecy, more metaphor than literal, that should have happened and probably was about the sacking of Jerusalem in 69 AD. And it also was a failure because Jesus was supposed to come back. So it didn't work. But what has happened is, because it's such a perfect metaphorical melange, sometimes it's like a huge Nostradamus quatrain. It's so cloudy, the prophetic part, that it's one of the immaculate ways you can fall into it like flies to fly paper and buzz around and think you found home. But it's just the old cloud gazing game. I see a rabbit in the cloud, you see a donkey, and we have a fight over it. And some people go to war over it throughout the religious evolutions of the last 2,000 years. And it could very well be a complete misread of a prophecy. And then people are so indoctrinated that they're literally trying to make it happen according to the dogma, not according to what St. John really was writing about. And I have a book called Psychotic Prophecy that will look at that. That's one in the works, which will actually takes the real Greek and looks at it with my scholar friends, rabbinical and otherwise, evangelical, and we look at this and we strip all this bad translation, which is the basis for so much dogma. So anyway, like Nostradamus, this happens in other scriptures. And in most cases, it's meant well. It's just a mistake. There was nothing evil in it. Or if there's an evil, the evil is unconsciousness. And for me, there's only one evil in the world: unconsciousness. What sin means is off the mark. It means forgetting. It's to forget your place, your truth. And I have to agree with the original version of sin. It is when we sin, when we forget ourselves, when we forget our love, where we forget what we came into the world with, this luminous innocence. And everyone's to be forgiven because it's nobody's fault. It happens. And so you can't be responsible for any crime if you're an unconscious sleepwalking person. So in a way, no one's responsible. Everybody should be forgiven, even Hitler, because you have to be an enlightened being to be responsible to live a fully conscious life. And if you're a sleepwalker, it's whatever got you to be a sleepwalker just needs to be taken away.
So, John, we have some good news here. A Matrix sync. The Warrior in chat. We've got 839 people in the chat right now, and the Warrior says, "How weird is it that I saw John on the History Channel today about Nostradamus?"
Yep.
Hello. Well,
Hello.
folks, what we have here is somebody that I would say is quite well known, and it's great when you go out and do I don't know, signings or whatever. You have an opportunity to talk to people in public. I mean, the line goes out the door for people to talk to you. So you definitely have a great following of people around the world. Like you said, it's a worldwide phenomenon. And folks, if you go to HogueProphecy.com, if there was somebody that in the chat that said, "How do I get a reading? How do I do that?" Go to HogueProphecy.com. You can set one up with John. He'll definitely get back to you via email. And let's go back. I just wanted to throw that out there. We're in the Matrix, man. We are in the Matrix. Oh. And Rex is upstairs right now, actually. Thanks. Nice to meet you.
What was it that Morpheus said? This is your ego. What did he say? Your identity construct. When he jacked him into the first program, and he says, "Look, you have your hair back. And then he says, "What? You're breathing. Do you think you need to breathe?"
The Matrix.
I love the Matrix. It's really a profound. When I watched it, when it first came out, my jaw dropped. I said, "My God, these people are talking about a fundamental existential issue." And so I went, man, every once in a while, it goes to something like that. Now, they also masterfully covered it by having a lot of great kung fu and all of that, which was wonderful and amazing and stuff. So they were entertaining as well as profound in the message.
I want to just say one other thing too about the Matrix. I remember when it came out, and one of the actors in the film was on, I think, Conan. I've always loved Conan. He's so good at making fun of himself. So I take a note out of the book of Conan. I do my best to make fun of myself, not only because it's very easy to do, but I learned it from watching you, Conan. You need to have me on your show. But anyway, I remember I think it was 1999, and he was talking. There was somebody on his show, and he said, "Yeah, I'm in this film, and it's called The Matrix, and it's going to be bigger than Star Wars." And I'm thinking to myself, "Whoa, no way!" But you go back. And I would say Matrix is every bit as big in this era to many, as far as the effect it had on the conditioning of humanity, just the very powerful film.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
Conan, call me, man.
Yeah. So this brings me back to I was searching for all the dames. And I then, I'm having a little cramp in there it goes. My thumb cramped and went,
oh, man.
What's that about? Hello.
Your thumb just got 5G'd.
Yeah, I got 5G'd by something. I'm going to and my mouse just went weird. So okay, we're real plugged in. Where is it? There it is. Okay, I got to put on my second pair of eyes, and yeah. So I went through this search through all the dames, and I found it was like, it's, for me in this field, it's so rare. And it was like discovering, fire or something again. And this is the prophecy. It's quatrain 65 of Century Volume 5. And it says in the translation, suddenly arrive, the terror will be great. The principal players hide the affair. And the dame, meaning Notre Dame, in the glowing hot coals and wood embers will no longer be in sight. Thus, little by little, will the great ones be angered. Now, suddenly arrived. Look at the situation we're in. I was speaking earlier at the beginning of this interview, how even more so than 911, people were engaged, activated, watching it live as it was going down. So suddenly arrived. Which was an unusual thing for a 16th century man to make. And suddenly there's this fire. It suddenly arrived, and the terror will be great. The terror meaning like the whole world is shocked watching it, I would say. And the principal players hide the affair indicates that maybe there's a cover-up going on of exactly who or what did this fire. And the Notre Dame in the glowing hot coals and wood embers will no longer be in sight. Now, when the fire started, initially, it just disappeared. It was this huge, huge column of flame, hundreds of feet high around the pinnacle. And also the way he uses his French is really shocked, because it's specific the way he uses his French when embrase plus sera en vue. He's talking about glowing hot coals and wood embers. There were aerial shots of, it looked like a burning cross in the night of Paris, because they were flying over it with drones and helicopters, and you could see all the forest, the vast forest of oaks, 800 years plus old, that had collapsed and burned over the vault, a ceiling, making it an oven. And it looked exactly as he describes it. It's like a braise, it's like a barbecue, with glowing embers. And it's in shape of the cross, because that's how the cathedral would look from the air, as a huge cross to heaven, but on fire. And so, I think it was in May when we talked about this before. And, I talked a lot about how just before, there were certain ideas that were set up, that were completely set up by none other than the man heading the investigation. He's literally standing while the fire is going on, and he's telling reporters who don't even question him, he's saying, I lean towards it being a short circuit in an electrical wire. And no reporter had the balls to do their job and say, how can you have any opinion when it's more than likely that you're not even going to, the fire is still going, the crime, if you will, if there's a crime or an accident, is still undergoing, and you probably won't be able to enter this structure for another 10 days. How can you, before even being at the scene of the crime, sifting through the actual evidence, come into this with something you're leaning towards when you have no idea what went on in there? Please comment. And that never, just these dumb reporters like in America going, oh, okay, all right, well, I guess we'll go somewhere else. And so I see him doing it, and I'm going, wait a minute. And obviously I wasn't the only one seeing him, because, but before that, then the Parisien magazine publishes something that gets read the following morning all over the place that says the oaken beams were dusty and powdery and super dry. No proof, just hearsay, and that gets added to the mythology of probably a short circuit, probably the oak was dry, because in common sense, the same common sense, mind you, that sometimes works really well, but other times when you look at the horizon, or you look at how the earth isn't moving, but the sun and the moon are moving and the whole galaxies are moving, you could assume by common sense that the earth doesn't move. It's the center of the universe. So common sense can work, but science sometimes finds out stuff the common sense doesn't understand. But here was these common fools creating this comic-sensical idea of dry oak, because it's 800 years plus old, must be dry. And, he's saying I'm leaning towards a short circuit, and he has no knowledge of the area where the fire happened, if there's even a electrical line there. And he's the head researcher, he's the investigator. So it was so bad that the person who was the chief architect specialist of medieval architecture, who had retired in 2013 after being 10 years there, a man named Benjamin Mouton, was given by the guy who replaced him, Monsieur Villeneuve, New City, said, I want you to go on national TV and you're permitted to say this, and this. And he went out there. And so the next following day after the Parisienne, he's on national TV. And in my book is the entire I translated the transcript of their entire conversation. And in it, it's quite riveting, because what you find out is, one, there was no, the oak was very hard and not dry. Two, that there was no work site anywhere near where the fire started. That means no electrical, no stuff. Three, that there was nobody working on the structures or on the scaffolding anywhere around it for about 4 hours. And there's footage now since then showing when the fire smoke began, which is like around 5 o'clock, 5:15. Nobody was there. It was a short day. You find out these things. You also find out, rather innocently on his part, that there were only 2 guards at all times actually looking at this vast structure. What you don't find out, which has been suppressed by a lot of the French and world news, which I have links to the articles and things that prove it was so. There has been a plague of vandalism across France since 2018. 800 plus Christian installations, holy sites, and churches have been vandalized. A number of them, dozens, have been set on fire. So there's a motive floating around there. Doesn't mean it happened, but if you're in the investigator, you're not leaning towards a short circuit when you well know that Saint-Sulpice, in the previous, almost exactly a month before, on the other side of the Seine, the second largest cathedral in Paris, was hit with a firebomb on its big wooden doors, causing $200 million damage. And they said it was arson. Motive. So you've got 2 guys. And what this book, 2 guys, security guys, one's looking at the map with the little flashing lights. And if something goes weird up there, he's got to have the other guy run upstairs and elevators. And I've been in Notre Dame. It's a huge place for one man to climb up into the rafters. And if you look at the pictures of inside the attic, it's just a huge, big black labyrinth of wood, old medieval wood and stuff. And there's one guy. And there's churches being firebombed in Paris and vandalized. And there's only 2 guys at any time. And guess what? And this is what the book gets in since April, since May when we talked. I have a whole section about how it's been set up in the findings. It turns out that the guard who was watching the buttons and the lights in the office was on his second 8-hour shift because his replacement didn't even show up, didn't even send a message. So this guy is now in his second 8-hour shift. You gotta be tired. And guess what? He's new. It's the first 8 to 16 hours he's ever been on the job. He doesn't understand the complications of the system. He starts sending that other guy to all the wrong places. It's just, it's just a Keystone Cops mess. And if you've lived in France and all, there's a side of where this stuff like this happens all the time, even though they say, oh, everything was done right and everything. But for instance, they found that the rafters, the Les Trois Frères, which was the three brothers, which was the group that was building up all the scaffolding to do the spire, they found cigarette butts all over the spire. They weren't supposed to smoke. Of course, the guy said, but they were only on the scaffolding. They weren't down near the spire where it started. And of course, the thing that's dumb about that is, well, now we'll never know because that all went up in flames and there's nothing left. And you guys didn't even start sifting through this stuff until 10 days later. After a lot of rain and a lot of this and that, the crime scene was old, if it was a crime scene, if it was a sense of arson. So after all of that in June, it happened in April, and in June, this fellow, this Heitz, who was the head of the Inspector Clouseau, was leaning towards circuitry issues. He says, well, we assume it was a short circuit. We have no evidence. That's our assumption that this is what happened. We had the issue with the butts and the rafters. They said they were sorry, basically. They weren't following protocol. We don't have evidence that any of those things started anything. And they say it would be impossible anyway. And in so many words, we believe them, even though, and then he says, we're not going to investigate any other people directly, just keep the investigation open. I see the gumshoe issue here. Just go through the motions, just kind of look like you're getting something done, and then eventually it'll be stopped. So
let me make a note on that too, just real quick, if I may. As a media spokesperson, if you're doing investigations and you want to have the upper hand, you could put out a story via media where it's like, oh yeah, no big deal, we ain't worried about it. When in reality, you've got groups going deep. They're trying to find out exactly what's going on, and they're everything but complacent in getting. Now, I'm just throwing that out there. If I was a detective and I was looking for somebody or something like that, it would be a perfect way to oftentimes maybe even bring them out.
Well, yeah. I mean, I thought about that, and but my experience of the French culture and all, no, this is complacency, because they didn't even mention. It's amazing about French news. It's like they just want to make it all happy and fluffy, and they're only forced to look at the riots of the Gilets Jaunes, the yellow vests, because it's right in their face. But there's if you watch French TV, it's all really la-di-da, and we're all on a vacation, and
you got someone in the chat that's from I gotta throw.
I know. I'm sure I upset somebody
from France literally right now. And they're like, so what are you saying, man? It's somebody from France. It's a race thing. You're not saying that, are you?
No. What I'm saying is that the motive has been ignored. Assumptions have been writ by press and investigators as what it must be. An investigator, Benjamin Mouton, was given permission to contradict all of that by Villeneuve, who, by the way, is still saying, and this comes into this prophecy again about how this church may still collapse, because I wrote about it in the book, and he is backing up these many months later. He's constantly on the press, almost like trying to get people to listen to him. This is the architect that took over from Mouton and gave him the right to go on TV. He's very concerned. You see the vault, where all that wood crashed on, 2 parts of it collapsed, but it's very dried out by this really triple-digit summers that they're getting. And you got to understand that they're still sending robots underneath it to pull stuff out because the vault could collapse at any moment. If the vault collapses, the flying buttresses will have nothing to stop them from going this way. Boom. And you've got, except for the towers, a large part of the cathedral collapsing in on itself. And he's saying the danger is still real. And he's constantly on TV and people are going, okay. So the malaise, the other thing too is that no, these people that are doing it, it's not about being racist or being an anti towards another religion, because their temples are also being attacked. This thing is a plague, an epidemic of arson and things that are going on. And in the book, I show all of this. It's all documented. It's a big story, and it's not being told. And it's so much potential motive that to completely just be above it all as the investigator and not even mention these important things. Yes, it might be done more not to stop the guys who did it, if there are anybody there, from seeing that they were being watched, but it's more to placate the French populace. And the friend you have on, you know how that happens in France. You know it. It often happens that the government does not, if it can't handle something, it just doesn't want to deal with it and moves on. Let's go and have our vacation and forget all about that. I mean,
vacations are amazing. And I just wanted to say, just real quick, nationality has nothing to do with race or ethnicity. Somebody made that comment in there. I was like, wait a second, that's right.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that nationality, as nationality as I experience it, as being all my life I've been told I'm an American and I live in a Judeo-Christian world. And these are all these things that were put on me on my tabula rasa when I came in born innocent, like everybody else. So if there are certain patterns that happen in national conditionings, it's not racist. It's just a reality of programming. If you are programmed there's individual programming and then there's collective programming. It's the collective programming that makes one party see itself and its values a certain way and another party a different way, whatever that party is. And I mean the party of Americans, the party of people who are programmed to be Christians or Muslims. It's not a good or bad thing for me. It's just, I see it as a state of programming when it's unconscious that people fall into. If the same person that is French who was talking here, or me, were born in Israel or born in Japan or born in New Zealand as a Maori or something, we would have different programming. So, and this is important because this is the engine. This is my open secret. This is why I've been so accurate over the last 4 decades, is that I see prophecy as a projection of the past repeated in the future, individually and collectively by human beings. And if you go into the deep nature of how people beyond their own conscious responsibility fall into these patterns, so nobody's at fault here. You have to be awake to be at fault. I contend, is that this is the engine, this is the fuel that makes prophecy work. This is why, if you understand the mechanics of this habitual nature, you don't have to be a psychic on top of it. You can pretty much extrapolate what's coming next, because history repeats itself, because we're programmed generation after generation to repeat the mistakes of the past and not even know that we're doing it. Because part of the program is you're not self-aware that you've been programmed. It's the ultimate, and as far as I'm concerned, the root conspiracy is that people are not living as they were meant to be by any society for thousands of years. And that we are entering a period now where that kind of habitual programming basically could destroy the human race in the next 30 years. So I'm rather hopeful that now that it's confronted Now that each year we enter deeper into this century, it's being confronted more and more. More and more people are going to understand the mechanics of their own self-inflicted disasters, even on a planetary level. And I'm hopeful, and I'm in the work to help enlighten people into this ultimate conspiracy, which, if it's not faced and shine a light upon by enough people, it will destroy the human race in the next 30 years. So one way or another. So anyway, but here's the thing. Here's the other thing I looked at. What if by accident, Prosecutor Heights is right? What if it was a short circuit? What if somehow it wasn't, as Mouton said, you need a lot of gas or accelerant to start a fire that could start these heavy, dense logs of oak setting on fire? Okay, what if he's wrong? I mean, I point out in the book that Mouton openly admitted that he never tested his theory. So thanks for his honesty, but that is an important point for skeptical inquiry. Did he take a piece of oak and go into a fire research lab and actually set it on fire with a match and see if it went poof? No, he didn't. And to his credit, he admitted that. So, but let's say that's what happened. There's aspects about this prophecy that show that it might be the scandal that slowly comes is in the next years and decades of the reconstruction of Notre Dame. Already, the people overseeing this, the architects, have decided that they're not going to exactly replace what was destroyed. They'll just, it's kind of a nebulous kind of phrase saying, we'll keep it in according to its look, its appearance, which means it's got a lot of people upset in France, that it means it's not going to be the same church. In fact, there's a fight going on between two groups of architects that want to kind of modernize it a bit or keep it the old way. So the scandal may very well be, and the great ones being those of the Catholic faith, all the way up to the Pope, are probably over the next, it's, by the way, Macron wanted it done by 2024 for the Olympics. He got very clearly disappointed because they said, no, this is going to take 20 to 30 years to fix. So that'll actually be quicker than the last big renovation. It started in 1844 and ended in 1869, where this current spire that got burnt went down. And so anyway, this is what could happen is that the great scandal, as people are slowly angered, is the monstrosity that maybe they're going to turn Notre Dame into. So that's another possible scandal that Nostradamus is talking about, other than an arson or simply terrible neglect. So there's about 3 potential scandals happening here. And of course, there's still the possibility that the church, as he warned in this prophecy, he warned that, hold on, I'm having iBooks coming up. He said, suddenly arrive, the terror will be great. Suddenly everybody's seeing it's on fire. The principal players hide the affair. And the Notre Dame in hot coals and wooden embers will no longer be in sight. Little by little, the great ones will be angered. Well, if it's no longer in sight, it may be more than just the smoke making it disappear in the initial flames. It could still collapse. The head of the architects, Villeneuve, still believes that danger is very high, and no one's taking him seriously. And he ought to know. So those are all, those and many other things I talk about in this new book. This is my 59th book.
59, like, wow.
Yeah, I wrote.
You got a whole library, John. That's what I'm talking about, man.
Kind of shocking because I have them all displayed, and I go, hello. I sometimes sit and look at the books and I go, my God, did I write all that? And some of my books are 1,000 pages long.
That's awesome. Well, let's do this. Like let's leave on a happy note. Let's leave on some happy quatrains, some happy prophecy, and HogueProphecy.com is awesome. And you should do a reading for me.
Yes.
Yes.
Now the thing is,
and I'm not the one that brought that up. There was some people that mentioned that in the
I've
chat.
been thinking about that, Rex. I also was thinking to do that with Heidi at some point, because I know she wanted that with her show. But the thing I have to ask you, as I'd ask her too, is I don't know what will happen when I do a reading. I mean, this oracular thing that overtakes me could go anywhere. And my concern is that I would talk about private things that I would be concerned if people listen that they shouldn't, you don't want these things brought up. And the reason is I can't, there's no way I can do this with any constraints, because I'm not doing it. I am overtaken by something bigger than myself. And it cannot happen with any constraints at all. And, nothing terrible or bad might happen, but that's kind of how this works. So that's why when I do private readings, it's okay, because you have this loving reader. He's there. He creates a beautiful space, and then we go into stuff. But do you have a solution for that? What's your advice on that? Because I've tried to figure that. I've been thinking about this reading with you on.
Well, I was thinking about it at first, and I was going to say something, and I saw something in the chat, and I think I was picking up on the vibe in the chat, and I was like, you know what? If I do it, it should be off air. It shouldn't be something on air, and then I could talk about it.
That's why I'd love to do that. Certainly, we got to do that.
Yeah, but to do it, and Heidi, man, I certainly miss Heidi. She is amazing. She's just working so many hours with her other career.
Yeah.
And her, I would love to get her back on. She says she's going to come back on, but she just needs some time off. And maybe we could put together like a roundtable discussion. You, me, and her would be fantastic. And I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot since she was on the program before about astrology. So, and the Vedas and the Vedic stuff. So that'd be wonderful.
Yeah. Let's do it that way. And then we can talk about it to everybody at large in a way that's cool. Yeah. I miss her too. I know she's working really hard, and I'm looking forward to when she comes back, because I'd love to do some shows. And hey, well, here's a happy thing, man. I saw your show with Chetan Parkin, and that was amazing. The human design guy.
Yeah, he's great. And he's going to be back on as a guest. He might do somewhat of a semi-regular thing. Really cool. I'm so glad you introduced me. And, I wanted to ask you a couple things before we close out here. So within the next few months, actually, let's just say by January, what are some key moments to look forward to or to be aware of, and are they connected with planetary alignments?
Well, certainly, and I speak in code again, certainly there's a lot of things that are going to happen rapidly come January, February about that, which I don't want to algorithmically mention. I think you all understand why, with the nature of our world these days. And so, but certainly a certain new person jumping into the arena has potentially changed the entire outcome of what may happen in early November of 2020. I'm writing an article about it. It's definitely a game changer. It's somebody I've been writing about for 12 years, thinking this person might finally do it. He has absolutely the means to do it on his own without any influence from anybody else. And it will be, I will simply say this, that his competition in this arena is a message of stability over unpredictability and over extreme partisan this or that. And if people can get beyond the fact that he has a charisma as exciting as chopped liver, I'm thinking that people are probably tired of charisma, and chopped liver just might work for a lot of people. I'm not endorsing this person, but I can see where this person has much more experience in the arenas in question than anybody I've seen run for what he's running for in 25 years. So, of course, he is, we'll put it this way, our modern form of aristocrat.
He's got a few bucks, doesn't he?
Yeah. So aristocrat versus aristocrat as a crap could very well see a whole different show starting in just the new year as people go to the farm state to start this Hunger Games. That was pretty good.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So
I didn't slip that time. It's so hard.
What did you say?
I didn't slip that time.
You did it. Good job. So you have the coconut.
Yeah.
Coconut that makes the coconut. And I don't know why I did that, but there's a couple smiley faces right there. Ladies and gentlemen, what do we call this? We call this poll of ticks.
You made an anagram, Rex. That's an anagram.
They're polls of ticks. They're full of ticks, and that's all that they are. They talk about things, and they say they're going to do things, and they talk about it. What are we going to do? We're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk more and talk, and we're going to blame it all on you because, we're polls of ticks, and that's what we do. We talk about it. It's all an illusion, folks.
I'm lousy with poll of ticks.
It's polls of ticks.
Polls of ticks.
And you live in an illusion, folks. Doesn't it feel good to wake up? It feels amazing to be every single day to wake up and realize that it's just an illusion. This is a game, and we can enjoy it if we want to. Or we can be on the other end of the Pac-Man where we're the pellets and we're getting consumed by this giant cosmic Pac-Man. And on that note, John, thanks for being here, man.
Hey, Rex. We pull a rabbit of new ideas out of the hat every time.
Pajama pants, hello.
Hello.
Change you want to see, everybody.